Good morning to everyone, and we are starting our informal breakfast background on Ukraine first meeting. We will have a series of such meetings throughout the week and perhaps further to help international journalists working for different global media who are working now in Ukraine and understand Ukraine better and give more context on Ukraine, on Russia, and on the war that is going on. My name is Andrii Zelinskyi. I'm co-founder and CEO of Tvoe Misto, your City of Yours Media Hub. And we welcome today in our studio two great speakers who know a lot on Ukraine and on geopolitical issues. And I would introduce Father Andrii Zelinskyi and Roman Kechur. We are going to talk to explain what we see on the recent developments, and then we will be happy to talk on any questions you have. So our first speaker, Father Andrii Zelinskyi, is advisor to the head of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, Archbishop Sviatoslav, and he's chief military chaplain of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church. So has spent a lot of time in war zones in Ukraine, and is a political scientist also, author, publicist, and I would say a well-known philosopher. Father Andrii, I would love to ask you to explain more the philosophical implications of the Russian military aggression against Ukraine, and how you, as a philosopher, as a priest, as a military, as a chaplain, how do you explain how these things, such terrible, horrible things, may happen in the 21st century?
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. So, despite the fact that I teach political science and not philosophy, the war in Ukraine does leave certain philosophical implications without which we can't actually understand what's going on around us, what's going on in the world. This last Saturday, President Biden in Poland mentioned that the war in Ukraine, I'm quoting, will define the 21st century. So the events that have an impact on the century do have certain philosophical, I would say, implications as well. I would like to, and by the way, philosophy, it's not about giving answers. Philosophy is more about asking right questions. So what I would like to do nowadays, I would like to draw your attention to questions that seem very significant to me personally, but I hope that they must be significant to the whole global society nowadays. If we really try to have this 21st century, despite all the facts, all the threats, all the problems that are in front of us. So number one, maybe it's a part of the global culture already. The term a tank man. If you remember Tiananmen Square, and it's on videos where there is a tank, there is a man in front of a tank. There's China, and that little tiny man is capable to stop a huge tank. So it was like a symbol of humanity that has more strength than any political, so to say, implications, issues whatsoever, than the power, than the political authority, than the power of authoritarianism. Now, if you go to video, there is one also on YouTube, and there is a Ukrainian tank man, I call it. And it tells us a completely different story, and it's a very sad story. It's right there, it's on YouTube. There is a tank, there is a man asking the tank not to shoot. And there is a tank shooting a man with a missile. Unthinkable. It's like two different tank men, but they tell us about two different epochs in the history of humanity. Something went wrong. A whole tank, just to think for a while, a whole tank is shooting one single man with a real missile. If you remember also it's also in the video, the bomb dropped on the maternity hospital in Mariupol. the bomb drop on the drama theater in Mariupol, 300 people dead. A line for bread, 10 of them dead. There was a peaceful line. People were standing, waiting in a line for bread. So I'm just pointing to these events because they tell us more about global situations of our humanity than about a regional, local conflict. My first question is, how come? How come that we, the people of the 21st century, are capable of such level and scale of violence and cruelty? How come? That's a very serious question. Because Europe hasn't witnessed this kind of violence for maybe 80 years, since World War II, since the end of World War II. Because, of course, you would say that there were other wars in Europe. There was war in Yugoslavia. Yes, but this war is particularly cruel. Why? Because it's senseless. It's a completely absurd, without even a single reason, violence against hundreds of thousands, against millions of population of Ukraine. So the absurdity of this war makes it more cruel and more violent than any other war that has a certain goal. This one, can anybody tell me what's the goal? Like demilitarization, denazification. Oh, come on, everybody understands that these wars have no sense at all. These terms in the situation of Ukraine has no sense whatsoever.
And can you explain why more?
Because where can you find Nazi in Ukraine? Because demilitarization would mean to, of course, everybody knows that the war against Ukraine, the military aggression against Ukraine, started in 2014. And there was a real war zone in the southern eastern part of our country. And demilitarization would mean to deprive us of any kind of means to prevent the military aggression. It's like to say, please die and then we win. Or peace costs your lives. Please die and then there will be peace. So that's the formula of demilitarization in the context of an ongoing war since 2014. Denazification, where can you find a Nazi? Yesterday I was a participant at the conference in the University of Jakarta in Indonesia, and the subject of the conference was, can we find Nazi in Ukraine? Yes, of course, but only in the Russian tanks. That's the only place where you can find Nazi, on the Russian tanks, in the Russian units they brought here, because you can, that's another question, but anyways. So this level of senseless cruelty and senseless violence. So this poses, like, number one question, how come that at the beginning of the 21st century we're once again capable of this kind of violence? But number two, it's very close to this one, it's very important. Where have we failed as humanity? If this kind of violence was possible after World War II, when all the institutions, like the whole architecture, the whole design of the international organizations was constructed in such a way that we can prevent exactly this type of violence, where have we failed? Something didn't work. And as we can observe it nowadays, of course, nothing works. None of the international institution works. I mean, United Nations, come on, just mere words that have no effects. Even European Union at times shows that there is a lack of efficiency among the 27 member states of the European Union. So all these things, but once again, they bring us also to a question. Maybe we used wrong values, because like the whole liberal democracy, European liberal democracy, was pointed as a goal, was once again to prevent this kind of violence and cruelty. What have we missed? The education, wrong educational process, wrong values, wrong institution, culture. That's the whole function of culture in the society, is to prevent this kind of cruelty. And now we're talking about Russian soldiers. We see what they do. We used to perceive Russia in the world used to perceive Russia as the culture of Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, Turgenev. But how come they didn't help? Well, this is real cruelty. I mean, like, if we're talking from here, from the office, it's one thing, but if you go to the battlefields, if you go to the cities destroyed by the Russian artillery and the Russian bombs, if you go to Mariupol nowadays, My goodness, it looks completely different, and the terms violence and cruelty obtain a completely different sense in such context. So that's number two question. Where have we failed? Number three question, of course, has to do with this one as well, because it raises, like, we all remember the words of German Chancellor Scholz saying that, oh, come on, please, it's only Putin who's guilty, don't blame it on Russian people. And then Pablo Coelho repeated, don't blame it on common people.
And we heard something similar yesterday.
Yesterday, but then
speech
I'm just asking
President
myself, is this Putin dropping an air bomb on the theater? Is this Putin shooting with this missile tank in a man? Of course not. There's a human person. And I would usually say, like, of course, there is the first and the foremost responsibility is on the political authorities of the country. They make decisions which the citizens have to follow. That's number one. The hardest, the most, I would say, responsible person. Then, of course, there are military authorities who try to do, like Mikhail Mizintsev, who try to do their best to destroy Mariupol as they did it with Aleppo, because there are military authorities who try to perform or to be as faithful, as loyal as they wish. Then there are, of course, common people. I was always asking myself about those pilots who have their relatives in Ukraine, who are right now like prisoners of war. But come on, if you are still a human being and you understand that you're killing innocent people, of course there is Russian propaganda, but then there's still, I mean, if you're a tank person, then you see a human being in front of you. Well, there is no Putin in front of you. There is no Mikhail Mizintsev, no any other general. You are a human person. Where is that freedom? Where is that consciousness? Where did we lose them? I mean, the 20th century, the progressive humanity, the liberal democracy. What have we done wrong? That's a very serious question, by the way, because otherwise we only pretend. We live in a society which is not real. We preach the values which we don't believe in. We say politics, but it doesn't do the work it's supposed to do, because politics is an organized society. It's exactly with the scope and goal to prevent the human beings from cruelty, from violence. Well, anyways, so who's to blame? Yes, of course, everybody is to blame. And not only those who shoot in the battlefield, but also those 74% of the Russian population who support the military activities of President Putin. I usually say that Putin is eternal for as long as there are 74% supporting him in Russia. Because all of this is responsible. No, it's not only one person. Naive to think that like this. But not only Russians are responsible. Come on. Russian gas, diminished support of NATO institutions on part of the EU member states. Aren't they responsible? Of course they are. Well, anyways, so that's the third question, important question that we have to ask ourselves to prevent humanity from I would say, complete destruction. Number 5, which has to do exactly with the West. Can we build real democracy by sponsoring authoritarianism? It was so naive, and everybody knew. And especially those people who were saying it, they knew that it was naive to say that economy has nothing to do with politics. I remember one of the ministers of Germany a week before the war started saying that Nord Stream has nothing to do with politics. It's pure business. Come on. It's another pretension. It's another hypocrisy. But the whole thing is that we all know that this is hypocrisy, but we do accept it this way because, why? Well, that's already a social question. That's already, we can go back to very deep and profound questions of social philosophy. But anyway, that's another important thing. If we are building democracy while investing, but there's another thing, because everybody was so fascinating with Putin in Europe. Why? Because he's stronger than European leaders. He's stronger than European leaders who try to live according to certain values, try to follow certain rules. Wow, it was just a fascination. Of course, this is also a part that has, I mean, this part of attitude is also responsible for what we have today, for all these 100,000 dead. Sanctions, that's another important part. I mean, everybody knew that they were ineffective in 2014. So we were like saying, okay, we can prevent, but we don't want to hurt our interests. And the best way it was, of course, formulated, worded by Minister of Foreign Affairs of Hungary, and then repeated by some other Hungarian authorities, that yes, we understand, quoting, we understand that for President Zelensky, Ukraine is the most important, but we can't. But for us, Hungary is as important as Ukraine. So we can do anything that would, for example, it was the case was the gas, of course, that we can damage, we can hurt the Hungarian economy. Anyway, so because one of the greatest lessons humanity learned since World War II was that we can't prevent evil in any of its forms if we don't work together. So World War II learned humanity to stay together. World War II learned humanity, like the civilized world, the progressive world, to stay together. So when did we forget about this? That's another important question. And the last one that seems to me has a philosophical implication, and it's about like what's reality? You know, when I'm saying that how come a human person can be that violent? When have we failed? Where have we failed as European society? Not European society, but let's say a democratic society. Can you actually build democracy while sponsoring authoritarianism? And because all of this has to do with certain hypocrisy, as I said, like it's very hypocritical to say that no, Nord Stream is about business and not about politics. So the last question that appears to me is like, what's reality? And it seems to me that in the West, people still don't understand that this is exactly the case, that this is maybe the prior reason for war, and not just for this one, and not only for the local dimension of the Putin's war, that it has a global impact. Like, there are two different, I would say, two different realities. One is based on the sociological data. You ask people in Ukraine, whom you consider yourself, do you want to go to Russia? Do you want to be Russian? Stuff like this. And of course, the majority would say, come on, no, we don't want. So there is sociological data. There is an empirical evidence. There is a fact. And then there is a mental concept, an idea called Russian world. So this one is called Ukraine. It's an empirical data. It's a fact, once again. And then there is a Russian world, and it's a mental construct and nothing else. But when a mental construct becomes a standard, you use the resources and the military forces to make people follow this standard. So Putin, he doesn't see Ukraine in terms of its factuality, in terms of the sociological data, of the data provided by science, I would say. So he sees it through the prism of his own idea. And this prism has a name. It's called the Russian world. The Russian world is the unity based upon values among the people who speak Russian on the territory of Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. They've been repeating it since who knows how long, since 2007. He and Patriarch Kirill, of course, but all the other, let's say, but for Putin, it has a certain mystical, metaphysical significance. And he's been repeating it all the time. Like all the articles, if you remember that a year preceding the war, first there was this famous interview by Vladislav Surkov, the author of the war in Ukraine since 2014, while saying that there is Borsh Bandera Bandura Ukraine nема. So like the Ukrainian folklore exists, but Ukraine as a state, we don't see it. So that was his thesis, number one. Then last July, there was a famous article, infamous article written by Putin, and all the members of the armed forces were supposed to read it, all the soldiers, all the military in Russia, saying that Ukrainian as people don't exist, as a people doesn't exist. So he understand that in his opinion, there is no a war against Ukraine because Ukraine doesn't exist. There is no a war against Ukrainian people because they don't exist. There is a transformed by the Western, I'd say, efforts, part of what he thinks, believes, and names it Great Russia. sacred Russia, Святая Русь. So that's the concept. And but as I say, so this war is the hardest argument, the most real argument against the Russian world. Number one, he said there is a unity based upon values. Which values, I ask myself? Nobody has ever defined the values. But then there is a video on YouTube, which I like the best one, shows the parallel. The Russian police and the demonstrators are trying to escape from them. And then on the other side, in Kherson, there are Russian armed forces, and then there are Ukrainians with their flags going right on them.
With no arms.
With no arms. But this, like, it's about values. It's about two different sets of values. We are different, though. So we are built and raised on different values. Now, according to the Russian world ideology, there is one dominating religious institution. It's been like one for centuries. That's been uniting this world for centuries. That's Russian Orthodox Church, of course, with Moscow Patriarchate. Now, since the beginning of this war, the Patriarch of Moscow has said not a single word against the cruelty that kills thousands of his believers. Because the city of Mariupol, the city of Kharkiv, Sumy, Chernihiv, all of these people, most of them, they belong to the Russian Orthodox Church. He said not even a single word. Not a word of sympathy or empathy. Not a single word from a Christian leader, from a leader of the church who claims that all these people belong to his church. There's no unity. 15 of the 53, there are 53 diocese eparchies of the Russian Orthodox Church in Ukraine. 15 of them have already refused to mention the name of the title of Patriarch of Moscow, which means there is no unity based on religious ground as well. And now the Russian language, another famous claim of Russians, that all this space, the Russian world, is the same culture due to the same language shared by the population. Come on, people. Once again, the empirical evidence, the sociological data, maybe 60% of the Ukrainian soldiers, of the Ukrainian armed forces speaking Russian, fight Russian soldiers. The Ukrainian mothers who lost their sons, they cursed the Russian troops in Russian. The language doesn't unite in this case. So I'm just saying that the language, the church, whatever they say, it's not the reason for unity. But for Putin, this is the reality. The reality is not the empirical data, it's not the sociological data, it's not the fact, but the idea of the great sacred Rus of the great Russia. Anyway, so this is, that's it, yeah. These are the 5 questions that I think we are supposed to ask ourselves if we want to solve, at least try to solve this problem.
Father Andrii, thank you for all these questions. Now I hope we can find somehow the answers to these questions. You raise a question of mental construct of Russia, and I would like to get back to this question now. I would ask Roman Kechur, who is he's a prominent Ukrainian psychoanalyst, who is the director of the psychology program at Ukrainian Catholic University in Lviv, and who recently wrote 2 very interesting stories, I would say very insightful stories for analytics published in the time of war after invasion. One of them was called Putin Has Already Heard Niagara, and the second one, the most recent one, was Let Putin Go Mad. So you, as a psychoanalyst, how do you see this mental construct of Russia? What's happening? Is it really not only about Putin but also about Russia? And what is the psycho of Putin and of Russian people today? And we will speak in Ukrainian and translate it into English.
Дякую вам за запрошення. Я хотів спочатку сказати, що моя англійська не така добра, щоб я міг так вільно говорити на такі складні теми.
First of all, I would like to express my gratitude for the invitation and also to mention that unfortunately my English is not good enough to be speaking today in English.
Отже, Путін. Тільки лінивий не писав про психологічний портрет Путіна. Я не буду всього цього повторювати. І більшість з тих портретів є достатньо реалістичними.
I think that there have been so many descriptions of the psychological portrait of Putin already. Everyone has been talking about that, but I think that most of them are actually realistic.
Я хочу додати тільки один момент, який, мені здається, є дуже важливим і, можливо, в якійсь мірі визначальним.
But I would like to add one very important detail which could be defining in this case.
Отже, основні описи його психологічного портрету так якби формулюються навколо такої антисоціальної особистості.
So most of the descriptions they revolve around anti-social personality of his.
Що це означає? Це людина, яка занепокоєна тільки питаннями влади і намагається контролювати інших через усвідомлену маніпуляцію.
So this is the type of the personality who focuses a lot on power, and their main intention is to control the rest of the people through manipulation.
Все, що він говорить і робить, спрямоване на те, щоб контролювати нас, викликати в нас страх і інші почуття. І через контроль за нашими почуттями контролювати нашу поведінку.
So everything that he has in mind is to control ours, and for that purpose he is using fear. And in this way, it also controls the rest of the feelings that we might have.
Емоційне життя такої людини є збіднене. Така людина не здатна любити, вона здатна тільки ненавидіти, вона здатна бути розлючена, вона здатна бути перелякана, і вона має пусте я всередині. Нема любові.
So this is the person who is unable to love, and the only feeling that this person could have is the feeling of anger. This person is also feels really scared, and this is the person who is empty inside.
І це є такий фасад, це є перше його обличчя. Але класична психіатрія каже нам, що такого роду люди, коли декомпенсуються, якби актуалізують латентні радикали, якби повертаються іншою стороною.
And this is just the facade, this interior of the person, or the first phase, as we may call it. But if to talk about classic psychiatry, we know that this is the way where some latent radicals are being actualized.
Що робиться з ним, коли він лякається, коли він переляканий?
So what happens to him when he feels scared or frightened?
Він заходить в свій бункер, сидить за 5-метровим столом. Треба 2 тижні сидіти, щоб дочекатися аудієнції з ним. Його міністри сидять за 10 метрів від нього.
And we know that he spends most of the time in his bunker, that he uses a 5-meter-long table to hold meetings. Then one has to wait for some 2 weeks to have a meeting with him. And this is the way he actually talks to important people surrounding him.
Кухар, який готує йому їсти, є мільярдером. Це єдиний у світі випадок.
So his chef, a person who prepares food for him, is a billionaire. That's the only case in the world of this kind.
Він всерйоз боїться отруєння.
Because he is scared so much of
Як
being
середньовічний
poisoned.
король, так, має людей, які пробують його їжу.
So he resembles us of a middle-aged king. So he has a person who tries food for him.
Отже, коли він лякається, він стає параноїком.
And when he feels scared, he becomes paranoid.
Отже, його динаміку ми можемо спостерігати між антисоціальним хлопцем, таким крутим мачо, і переляканим параноїком.
So here we can observe this dynamic between this antisocial, tough, macho and paranoid person who's really scared.
Президент Обама колись сказав про нього, що він є крутий хлопець з тонкою шкірою. Мені здається, добра характеристика.
And I think that was a very apt observation of President Obama, who once said that he is a tough guy but with thin skin.
Що далі? Якщо його далі лякати, що буде з ним далі, коли він буде ще більше переляканий?
So what happens next if he feels more and more scared?
Всі західні лідери бояться, що він буде настільки агресивний, що натисне ядерну кнопку.
Western leaders, they are afraid that if he gets so scared, he will become also more aggressive, and that might lead to him pressing the nuclear button.
І це може бути, але є один нюанс, один тонкий нюанс, який потребує дуже професійного розбору, дуже професійного погляду.
And there is a possibility of this happening, but there is also a very subtle detail behind this which has to be elaborated upon.
Якщо він буде настільки переляканий, щоб натиснути ядерну кнопку, це означає колективний суїцид, розширений суїцид. Він вб'є нас і загине сам, і все його оточення загине.
So if he feels so scared that he decides to press this nuclear button, that will be the case of collective suicide, because by killing himself, he will also kill very many other people.
А він боїться заразитися коронавірусом, він боїться бути отруєним, він боїться смерті.
And we know about some other fears of his, coronavirus, poisoning, and death itself. This is what he fears of.
Він може дати таку команду тільки в психозі, тільки коли він розвине психоз. А коли він розвине психоз, він буде під столом ховатися від космічних променів.
And he can give this order when he is psychotic. So only when he is on that stage of psychosis, he can do that, and he'll be hiding under the table because he would be afraid of these rays.
І це буде помітно всім. Це буде бачити секретарка, ад'ютант, всі спецслужби, міністр оборони. Такої команди ніхто не виконає. І в цьому є наше забезпечення. Угу.
And very many people surrounding him will notice this. His secretary, the Minister of Defense, some other assistants of him, and they will not let this happen probably. So this is something that could actually help us in terms of our safety.
Для того, щоб це зрозуміти, ви мусите проконсультуватися фахових психіатрів. Вони вам мають це розказати.
So to understand this matter better, it's important also to have the consultation of renowned psychiatrists, because they are the people who know a lot about this.
Тепер що робить протилежна сторона? Що робить західні лідери, що робить Байден, що робить Джонсон?
So what about Western leaders, Biden and Johnson and others?
Вони його заспокоюють. Вони кажуть, НАТО ніколи не буде втручатися, ми ніколи не будемо стороною цієї війни.
They are trying to pacify him, saying that NATO is not going to be part of this deal, that we are not going to intervene.
А що робиться з Путіним, коли він заспокоюється? Він стає знову антисоціальним психопатом. Він на коні. Він пітерський гопнік.
And what happens to him when he is really pacified? Then he becomes this anti-social character once again. He becomes the so-called St. Petersburg gopnik.
Це означає, що Захід боїться більше, ніж Росія.
And it means that the western part of the world is more afraid as compared to Russia.
Це означає, що паритет холодної війни є порушений, бо він тримався на одинаковому страху.
And it means that this idea of Cold War has been moved to one side.
Отже, що потрібно робити? Треба атакувати його середовище, його ті башні Кремля.
So what can be done here? It's important that we attack his surroundings, the so-called towers of the Kremlin.
Треба всіх їхніх родичів, які живуть на Заході, евакуаційними автобусами відправити в Росію.
And it would be a good idea to have all of the relatives of his to be sent to Russia by evacuation buses and so on and so forth.
Тоді кожен причетний до цієї історії зрозуміє, що за ним спостерігають.
Then everyone who is affiliated with the story will know that they are being under observation.
І треба не боятися ескалації. І треба тримати Путіна в невідомості.
We shouldn't be afraid of escalation. It's important that we keep him in this uncertainty.
Я не говорю про військові речі, я не військовий експерт, я цього не знаю. Я говорю тільки про психологічний компонент взаємодії.
I'm not talking about military matters because I'm not an expert on them. I'm talking only about psychological issues.
Треба не боятися його божевілля, треба віддати контроль за його божевіллям його оточенню.
We shouldn't be afraid because of his madness. It's important that his surroundings has to deal with his madness.
Вони бояться смерті значно більше, ніж ми.
And they are much more scared of death than we are.
І вони вміють усувати царя. В них є така традиція.
And they know how to deal with Tsar. They have a long-standing tradition of doing this.
Це такий короткий коментар до поставленого питання.
So this is a brief comment as related to the question that you have brought up.
But that's again only about Putin. And what about the Russian people? Father Andrii mentioned that a society of Dostoevsky and Tolstoy has been supporting this, or silently supporting. The majority of Russians do support this war. How can this be explained from the psychological point of view?
Я коротко відповім. З вашого питання так випливає, ніби існують два російських суспільства. Ніби існує якийсь там Путін і існують там всі решта невинних росіян.
If you take a look at the question that you have raised, one may get an impression that there are two different types of societies that we are observing right now. And one is Putin and another one is just innocent, regular people.
Путін є протагоністом російського суспільства. Російське суспільство не має іншої візії майбутнього, як імперія.
Putin is protagonist of Russian society and they have no other vision rather than imperialistic one.
Національний розвиток Росії як національної держави передбачає розпад її, передбачає відпустити околиці. Російське суспільство на це не готове. Вони хочуть підтримувати імперію, тому вони ескалують.
And to have the development of this country, that would require the collapse, and this is something that cannot really happen.
Тому денацифікація потрібна тільки в Росії.
That is why denazification is important, but it's only for Russia.
Ми ведемо антиколоніальну війну, і це є остання її стадія. Я сподіваюся, ми переможемо.
We are waging a war against colonies, and I think that this is the last phase and that we will win.
Thank you, Professor Kechur. Thank you, Father Zelinskyi. And I would love to get now, if we have any questions from our guests, if we have any public questions, you can raise it. If not, we can go to our background part of conversation, and which will be totally off the record.